All right, welcome to Understanding the Basics of Milk Pricing. My name is Audrey Thompson, and I'm a staff attorney here with the Penn State Center for Agricultural and Shale Law. Today's webinar is part of the center's Understanding Agricultural Law series, a course designed to provide subject matter literacy and competence on fundamental issues of agricultural law to attorneys and business advisors who work with or represent agricultural or rural clients, but who may not necessarily specialize in agricultural law. This series is wholly sponsored by the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture's Ag Business Development Center, which was established through the 2019 Pennsylvania Farm Bill. The Ag Business Development Center aims to enhance the long-term vitality of Pennsylvania farms by supporting farm transitions, both from generation to generation and from conventional to organic farming, supporting beginning farmers, providing risk management education, and providing financial assistance through low-interest loans and grants. This webinar is part of our Understanding Agricultural Law educational series. As you can see, Brooke, I don't know if you're there.
There we go.
Advance the next slide there. We've covered numerous topics so far, including ag labor, land use regulation, crop insurance, conservation programs, ag finance, Pennsylvania's Clean and Green, and many, many others. Recordings of all these webinars are available on our YouTube's page, and accompanying materials can be found on our Understanding Agricultural Law landing page. Upcoming topics in our Understanding the Basics of Ag Law series include understanding the basics of pesticides. You can go to the next slide there.
Yeah,
there you go. And the Plant Protection Act and, federal and state seed laws, which will cover Plant Protection Act and Pennsylvania Seed Law, the Fair Labor Standards Act, and the Perishable Agricultural Commodities Act. And I would like to point out that for the pesticide webinar in September, we are approved to offer pesticide applicator recertification credits through PDA for that one. So if you know someone who needs that recertification, please refer them to us for that educational program there. And finally, just a couple of reminders before I turn this webinar over. This webinar is being recorded. If you have any questions, please write them down in the Q&A feature or put them into the Q&A feature, and I will collect those and ask them at the end. And please do ask us questions. We want to have a dialogue as much as possible in this format. And we encourage you to fill out the survey at the end of the webinar. Tell us what you liked, what we can improve, and what topics you'd like to see in the future. All right, I will now turn this webinar over to Brooke Dorr, the Center's Senior Staff Attorney. Brooke joined the Center for Agricultural and Shale Law in 2019. Prior to coming to the center, Brooke served as the Chief Counsel for Pennsylvania's Department of Agriculture, and before joining PDA, he practiced law in Lancaster County for 18 years. Brooke, the screen is yours.
All right, thank you, Audrey. We got a very fancy presentation here. We got videos and music at the beginning. And all right, so let's get right into it. We're going to talk about understanding the basics of milk pricing. We're going to deal with both federal milk marketing orders and the federal system. And we're also going to talk about the state system that exists in Pennsylvania, which is quite unique in the sense that most states don't have anything like that. And again, this is going to be geared toward more or less a entry-level type of understanding. We put together this entire series for that type of level of attendee. We will probably at some point in the future be doing deeper dives on certain topics, but we will identify those. So I apologize if you are a little bit past the level of this particular presentation. And of course, I apologize if I'm not able to keep it down at a entry level, because this is tough stuff. As the old expression goes, there's more headaches in a pint of milk than in a pint of whiskey. And that is specifically not about the production. This is all about the pricing. And, the federal pricing system is quite complex. And I've taken several cracks at trying to make it simpler for people to understand. So this will be another one of those. And let's hope I'm successful in making it a little easier to understand. Again, Audrey introduced me. That's me. I had a long career in private practice and then went to the Department of Ag, which is where I really got into my first exposures with dairy pricing, both federal and state, more geared towards state, but you have to sort of learn the federal to understand where the state fits in it all. And So there's my contact information. Love to get emails from anybody, any of our attendees, if you got questions. And if you didn't understand something, or I can, there's lots more resources out there. Believe me, we're just scratching a tiny bit of the surface here. So there's all sorts of things that out there that I could direct you to for better understandings and explain finer points. And one of the areas to go, Audrey talked about it, we have these virtual resource rooms as part of our website, and we have one that's called Dairy and Dairy Products Law, which is specifically on the issues we're going to talk about here today, as well as other dairy-related issues. And it kind of looks like this when you open it up. There's a drop-down menus over here. They're all on the left, but I had to kind of break it up so you could see the dark blue blocks here. These are sort of the headings of the different pages that are in that virtual resource room. We're going to be right where the star is here. We're going to be talking about price regulation at the federal and state level. There's lots more, as you can see here, in the virtual resource room. And so, and we'll try and probably are overdue for a little bit of a freshening up of that resource room, but there's lots of great stuff in there. Okay, now, federal milk pricing. Now, this is conducted through the operation of federal milk marketing orders. Otherwise abbreviated many times as FMMO, but there's not a whole lot. There's no easy way to say that one. You don't say FMO. I don't know. It's just federal milk marketing orders. You just got to spit it all out. And also there's marketing agreements side to this, which will perhaps touch on a little bit, but it's all pursuant to governmental authority, these milk marketing orders. And let me give you a little map here. I will show you the existence of what federal milk marketing orders are in effect in the United States right now. There are 11, and this is a map that shows you where they all are. And the key thing probably to understand, a couple little notes on this map. California is a very recent addition. There did not used to be a federal milk marketing order in California. And but for the rest of the country, this is a highly evolved version of the map at many times in past decades, and federal milk marketing orders are, some of them, decades and decades old, or the concept of them is decades and decades old. They've gone through many permutations and reconfigurations in terms of what geographic areas they cover, and exactly what they say. But the bottom line is, and their names for that matter too, we have these 11 right now. And as you can see, the numbers are all over the map. You got Northeast is Federal Order 1. Okay, that makes some sense. But then, right next to it, you got the Mideast, which is Federal Order 33. So you can see that it's the numbering system has, of course, evolved a lot, let's just say, and a lot of orders have gone away, so to speak, in the numbering system. Now, the other thing to keep in mind about the map is the areas that are white in the map are areas where there, in fact, is no federal milk marketing order in effect. Now, there can be many reasons for that. And in fact, we just mentioned that California did not have one before. And that certainly wasn't because California did not have lots of milk production, and they do, and did not have lots of milk processing plants, which they do. However, in some other areas of the country, it's more a product of the lack of a robust dairy processing and production infrastructure in those parts of the country, or large population centers in those areas of the country that you would usually bring along with them some degree of dairy processing. In any event, we'll probably see some evolution in all of this because, of course, the way things are going in the dairy industry these days, if you're familiar with it, is that the Western United States are starting to become the center of dairy production through these mega dairies with, anywhere from 10 to 50,000 to perhaps even 100,000 cows on a single facility. And those are coming up in Nevada, Utah, and some of these states that don't have an order. But in any event, these various boundaries of the orders that are in place now have been, evolved over many years. And we'll probably see more evolution of that in the future, just like we did when California was added. Pennsylvania, since we are here to talk about Pennsylvania issues for people in Pennsylvania as part of our mission from the Ag Business Development Center at the PA Department of Ag. Pennsylvania is actually in parts of it are in two separate orders. The light blue or grayish is the Northeast Order, Federal Order 1, and that's generally the order that we talk about when we talk about Pennsylvania, because that is the majority of the dairy production in that area, and or that is the majority of the dairy processing plants in that particular area. And if a plant is in the scope of the order's geographic boundaries, that's actually what really matters, because it's all governed upon, you may be a dairy farmer outside the line, so to speak, but if you're shipping into the order's geographic area, then your milk is fully covered by the order's terms. Now, Federal Order 33 is the Mideast, and that includes most of Indiana, all of Ohio, and all of Michigan. And then there's this part of Western Pennsylvania that is within 33. And there are some milk processing plants in that portion too. I may sort of be a little more Federal Order 1 centric in the things I talk about here today. Okay, now, all this starts and goes all the way back to the Depression. And as with many agricultural programs at the federal level, probably the two watershed events in the development of ag as an agency of the federal government, and also as sort of a policy making entity to support and ensure the continued viability of agriculture in the country and the advancement of it. This obviously, Abraham Lincoln and his presidency was the establishment of the USDA, as well as the land grant university system. And so he was the first person to appoint a Secretary of Agriculture. Those were all watershed years. The other watershed years were the Depression. Because at that point in time, the country, continued to be more isolated. International trade was not what it was now. And food had to be produced here. We were not in the business as we are today of having at least an ability to import, food at the quantities that we could today. And so it was even more important in those days to be maintaining the viability of all farms in order to feed ourselves. And people talk about, why does ag get such special attention from the government? Well, a government which fails to feed its people fails. So that pretty much tells you why it is that that is a priority, and that departments of agriculture always fill these dual roles of a regulator, but also a promoter. And that is because this fundamental concept that as humans, we need to eat every day, several times a day. And number two, in the concept of, or in the area of self-governance, again, a government that does not feed its people fails. And so that is why the government is particularly involved in agriculture as an industry in this country. And there's no way around that. And the ability to import food is not going to help us here in the United States. We still have to feed our people. The Agricultural Marketing Agreement Act of 1937 is the successor to a previous Depression-era statute called the Agricultural Adjustment Act. And it was all recodified in 1937. And this is generally, this is the act that provides the enabling authority for any type of agricultural, excuse me, I have a tendency to mistakenly hit the advance sometimes. This is the statute that provides all the enabling authority for all commodity marketing orders. And commodity marketing orders are an entire area of authority that exists at the federal level and that is administered by the USDA. And people are not as familiar with marketing orders for particular commodities, and many commodities have them, not just milk. So when we talk about federal milk marketing orders, there are many other marketing orders, sugar, for example, and all sorts of other commodities have their own marketing orders. And what are these marketing orders for? Well, take a look at the bottom of this little piece, and this is why I include this in here. In the recodification of the authority to have marketing orders in the Agricultural Marketing Agreement Act of 37, there was a declaration of more or less sort of the reasoning behind why the government is getting involved here and essentially lending the government's authority to the marketing of an agricultural product in some way, shape, or form. It says it's hereby declared that the disruption of the orderly exchange of commodities in interstate commerce impairs the purchasing power of farmers and destroys the value of agricultural assets which support the national credit system, and that these conditions affect transactions in agricultural commodities with a national public interest and burden and obstruct the normal channels of interstate commerce. So that's the kind of language that you see in many Depression era statutes, because we were living at a time would perhaps not unlike some of the things that we went through in COVID, and maybe maybe a little lesser scale, some of the things that we went through in the Great Recession of the late 20-aughts, the 2008, 2009, that period of time when we had massive, financial institution failures, almost lost a big chunk of our auto manufacturing. And in any event, this is the kind of language that you then see creeping into legislation. And that was why this was, coming into play, is because the Depression had so disrupted all aspects of commerce, and in particular farmers' ability to keep going, that intervention and government authority was needed. And if you know your history of the Supreme Court stacking and the Commerce Clause arguments that went on back then, or the threats of Supreme Court stacking in the Roosevelt times, we have quite an American, story to tell with regard to how it is that our government addressed these disruptions. In any event, this was one of the ways they addressed it, through essentially empowering the Department of Agriculture to put behind, let me go backwards, to put essentially behind a particular commodity group, such as sugar manufacturers or dairy farmers, and into or lend the government's regulatory authority to their attempts to stabilize, let's say, prices in their for their particular commodity, and many other aspects of how they market their commodity. In any event, in today's world, 7 U.S. Code 608C is the current provision that you would go look at if you want to actually look at the statute on things like federal milk marketing orders or other commodity marketing orders. This statute, the Agricultural Marketing Agreement Act of 37, is quite a surgical specimen at this point. It's been grafted together by so many amendments over the years that it's a little tough to read. Nicely, Section 608C isn't so hard to read. So the section about orders is not so bad. Now, here is essentially what the section says, specifically with regard to milk marketing orders, to try to allow dairy farmers to remain more viable and to market their milk in a more stable market condition. And before we talk about that, you have to understand how volatile dairy markets are, and many of you may, and some of you may not. First of all, we're dealing with a highly perishable commodity. I mean, milk in its fluid form, it might be the most perishable commodity that is that we sell and consume in this country. It is, after all, a bodily fluid. And, it is and just the way that we have to, be careful in the meat field, with those, all of those various commodities, milk is even more perishable and more volatile in terms of its safety and its, let's just say consumability. So that's obviously one thing. Other things that come into play is during the Depression and even, continuing to this day, dairy farmers are holding this commodity subject to spoilage in a very short number of hours. The rules essentially in the dairy industry are that you have to have your bulk tank where all your results of your milking of your dairy herd are stored until the truck comes along to take them to the processing plant. 72 hours. You got 72 hours to get that milk off your farm into a processing plant. So that is much shorter time that you would have in handling meat, depending on how it is that you're, handling it and et cetera. But in any event, so that's a big issue. The other issue that, comes into play with dairy, of course, is that the bargaining power is very unequal. Processors can essentially sit and wait out the farmers to drop their prices if they don't like the prices. And the farmers are desperate to sell their milk before it goes bad, and they may have to dump it. So, not only do we have this highly volatile commodity, but then you have large processors who are buying from hundreds and hundreds of different smaller dairy farmers. Used to be many more and much smaller. Now, of course, there is a lot of consolidation in very large dairies. But the bottom line is there's not an equal bargaining power between the two. And as they say generally in ag, all ag producers are price takers, not price makers. It's tough to, try to dictate what you're going to sell your product for when it's, A, subject to spoiling, and B, you're one of hundreds and hundreds of people who supply the same commodity to the processors that are purchasing it. And that's why milk cooperatives have come into play. And it's important to understand this system, to understand what a cooperative is. And I'm not going to go into that here. That's something that is very essential to understanding anything about the dairy industry, is to understand how cooperatives operate. The bottom line is when I have someone that I need to explain it to, I just say, this is like a labor union for dairy farmers. This is the representative of the collective dairy farmers in their numbers, hundreds and thousands of them belonging to dairy cooperatives who then do the work to secure the markets for that milk. And the cooperatives generally are the ones who are essentially hauling the milk from the farm to the plant, and then the processor, in instances where a cooperative is involved, the processor just simply sits at the plant and waits for the dairy farmers / cooperatives truck to show up to unload. And all of that transportation cost is on the dairy farmer to the processing plant. Today, we have consolidation of processing plants too. So you have processing plants that become further and further away. And so there's more travel time, and that just makes the whole problem even worse. So bottom line is, it's really essential to understand all these things. In any event, marketing orders shall contain, and this is what the statute says, that they shall contain provisions to classifying milk in accordance with the form in which or the purpose for which it is used. And that's the classification system that we use based in the dairy industry to this day, based upon the utilization of the milk. What is it being used for? Is it used for fluid milk to drink? Is it used for butter? Is it used to make powdered product? Is it used to make cheese or ice cream or some other type of soft product like, sour cream or yogurt or something like that, all of which have their unique properties and all of which have to be sort of understood to understand the large whole. Okay, so classifying milk in accordance with the purpose for which it's used, and fixing and providing a method for fixing minimum prices for each classification, which all handlers, which is another word for essentially milk processors, shall pay, and the time when they shall pay. And those are all the things that the milk marketing orders govern. And in the absence of the milk marketing orders, there would be little to no governing or regulation of those particular things. So that's why dairy farmers petitioned the government under the Ag Marketing Act of 1937 in order to establish these marketing orders, which then once established have the power of law, and handlers or processors are required to comply with them in order to get that commodity. So in one way, it's, I use the labor union analogy for cooperatives many times, but it's got a lot of holes in it, or it's not completely on all fours in terms of an analogy, because for one thing, there's a bit more governmental weight behind some of the terms that the producers can now dictate a bit because of the existence of a marketing order. But another key difference is a little bit on the other side, which is the milk check. In other words, the payment for milk goes to the cooperative, not to the individual dairy farmers. Then the individual dairy farmers are paid by their cooperative. So there is a little bit of a middleman. It's not like a dairy, or it's not like a labor union where the labor union doesn't collect your paycheck and then distribute it to all of the workers who are members of the union. So in that sense, totally different than a labor union. In any event, the other provision that's important to understand is that is the second bullet point I have here, which is prices shall be uniform as to all handlers, subject only to adjustments for volume, market, and production differentials customarily applied by the handlers, which can be pretty widespread, including production differentials. Means there's it takes one amount of work for a processor to make yogurt from milk. It takes less work to package it as fluid milk for drinking. It may take, another whole set of expenses and processes to make ice cream. And then let's say to make cheese or butter. All of these things take a different amount. There's a production differential in what it costs to do that. And therefore the price that is paid has to take account of that in some way, shape, or form. So that's why prices aren't completely uniform. We'll get to a little more of that in a second. So in other words, while you're trying to ensure that the processors pay everybody the same, it's pay them the same for milk that is used for same products. So in other words, comparing apples to apples. So the prices are different for the different classes of milk, which we will get to in a second. I have a slide for that. So in any event, this second bullet point talks about the allowances for differences, but the concept here is that other than one of these allowed differences, what they're shooting for here is that all handlers within a particular marketing order then have to pay the same amount for all the milk that they purchase that goes into butter, for example, or all the milk that they purchase that goes into cheese, for example, or that goes into fluid milk, for example. And prior to this, it sounds kind of elementary, but prior to this, that was not the case. And that just made market conditions even worse for dairy producers. Okay, here are the regulations. If you ever need them, you click on the link, and here are all the milk marketing orders. Here are the 11 right here in the middle here. That just list the areas. And this is all the rest of the regulations that deal with the federal milk marketing order system or other dairy aspects, just in case you ever need that. Now, how do you create one of these marketing orders? And this is an important thing to understand in the big picture. And I like to go over this because it explains to people exactly how these things came to be. They are not an act of Congress. This is a little rundown that USDA has right on their website. If there's a general industry support for a program, preliminary proposal was prepared by a steering committee of key industry people on behalf of, and generally this would be the producers of that commodity, and growers and shippers included in the discussions. A list of actual producers of the commodity is developed by the people who want to establish the marketing order. They request a hearing from USDA's Ag Marketing Service, AMS, and if it should indicate the degree of industry support. In other words, there needs to be a general consensus that this is something to be sought. Then there is a referendum vote, which we'll get to in a second. Then there'll be essentially an administrative process of hearings, et cetera, which we go through here in 3 and 4, and then an administrative law judge presides over the public hearings on the adoption of a commodity marketing order. Those hearings, and we're in the middle of one right now, which I'll talk about later. And then we'll just go forward here. And then there's a recommended decision from the ALJ to the USDA. And then ultimately the Secretary of Ag's office will essentially take all of that in. And there's a process for filing exceptions, the usual kind of Administrative Procedures Act stuff. And then USDA prepares a final decision as to whether a marketing order should be adopted, or is at least appropriate to put for a referendum vote of the producers. That's why you developed a list of all the producers, and they put together a draft of the marketing order. Then it goes out for a referendum order of the producers, and then the producers vote on it. In the dairy context, and actually it's in all contexts for commodity marketing orders, the referendum vote is in order for a marketing order to go into effect, 2/3 of the growers by number or 2/3 of the growers by volume have to approve the adoption of the marketing order. And if either of those thresholds are met through the referendum vote, then the marketing order is adopted. And then it can take some time to put it all in place, of course. These things could be quite involved. And as you see from the map, they involve multiple states, many of them. Okay, now let's lay a little bit of foundation for the federal milk marketing orders, which is important because I like to I try to teach this subject by saying that if you keep your eyes on this particular ball, which is the green text on this slide, then a lot of these confusing details can essentially be set aside if you keep remembering what the objective of the whole thing is. Now, I'll tell you that, and as I say here, eyes can glaze over when you start talking about this beyond this point. Now, the simple federal milk marketing order objective is Class 1 milk, and we'll talk about the classes in a second. Class 1 milk is fluid drinking milk. That is the simplest to process, and it actually nets the highest price. It is, when your milk is sold in 100-pound increments, and it's called a 100 weight of milk, and that's 11.6 gallons, and 100 weight of milk sold for fluid packaging and sale is the most lucrative way to sell milk and nets the highest return on the investment. All these other things take time, cheese, et cetera, all the things you have to make, they consume time and money in the process, and they don't return as much on the investment that is either paid for or invested to produce it. So fluid milk is the most lucrative. So what's the objective of the federal milk marketing orders? Is to spread that benefit from the most lucrative kind of milk you can sell, fluid class 1 milk, across all producers as best as you can. And that is essentially the objective. You just keep thinking that the highest return to a dairy producer is if their milk is used as fluid milk. Well, everybody can't be having their milk used as fluid milk. We have all these other products. And so the point is to try to make sure, and by the way, the producers are not the ones who generally would make the decisions about what your milk is going to be used for. Because that's the processor or the handler's prerogative. They're buying milk. Now, you may know what that processor is in the business of producing, but geographically, sometimes you're stuck with no fluid plant near you, and you have to sell for cheese, or you have to sell for butter, or whatever the circumstances may be. Or you need to be able, a particular area of the country needs to be able to produce a lot of fluid milk particularly when there was school lunch, when school's in session and there's school lunch and milk consumption was what it was, let's say in the 50s or 60s, and you needed to have that capacity. But then when school's out, you have a lot more extra milk around, and the cows aren't going to stop, producing it. So you got to have other avenues for this milk, make it into butter, etc. Pennsylvania, we have this giant butter plant operated by Land O'Lakes right outside of Carlisle. Why is that there? That's there because Land O'Lakes built it themselves because they needed to have some place to essentially process and a product to produce in addition to the fluid because they have more milk than the fluid demand. And we're living in a world, of course, where the fluid demand is ever shrinking. So here's the method behind all of this. There's a market-wide mandatory pool of Class 1 revenues, mandatory, as we'll talk about it in a second, but where all the revenues of Class 1 sales are essentially pooled together in a mathematical computation under the authority of the milk marketing order that is imposed upon the processors, by authority of USDA due to the adoption of the marketing order. All of those Class 1 revenues are pooled together, and then how much of that giant pool of revenue is attributable to Class 1 milk is factored, and there's a Class 1 price. How much is attributable to Class 2, Class 3, Class 4? We'll talk about that in a second. There's essentially a monthly system of spreading it around so that all the pool, everyone whose milk is in the pool gets ultimately at the end of the computation, which takes a couple months to do, they will get one uniform price. And we'll go over this a couple of times so that you get that. So you're taking all of the Class 1 revenue, you're pulling it together with other revenues. Everybody that contributes to that gets a uniform price, rather than some people getting this higher price because their milk is being used for Class 1 and somebody else is, getting a lower price because their class is used for, or their milk is used for, powder, let's say, to export or whatever it might, or butter or something, which, is a lesser return on the investment there. So that's the idea, spreading the wealth around among all the producers because of this Class 1, more lucrative market. All right, and it's done on a monthly basis, and this produces, and I'm not going to, sugarcoat it, this produces no end of problem to try to manage this in a continuing, month after month basis. And that's where the devil in the details, that is truly where all the headaches in the pint of milk are here. Okay, now let's go to, this is the classes. Sorry, it took me so long to get to the classes. Okay, fluid is Class 1, excuse me. Class 2 is all the soft products like yogurts and ice cream and cream cheese and cottage cheese and all of those things. Class 3 is hard cheeses. That's your traditional cheeses. And then Class 4 is butter and powdered products. For the most part, fluid, of course, is always number one, or was always thought to be number one in the, how much money you're going to make for selling a 100 weight of milk. And the others, lesser, and depending on market conditions, sometimes there can be some bumping up and down between Class 2, 3, and 4 as to what would traditionally follow after fluid as the most lucrative. That's kind of gotten shuffled lately, and that's caused a lot of problems, which we'll try to get to. I'm trying to go through this in a way that makes sense without inundating you. And hopefully, I'm going slow, but hopefully that'll help us. All right, here's a little structure of a little miniature version of how the pooling system works that hopefully will get your head into it a little bit. So Class 1 milk is set apart here, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. Class 1 is here because Class 1 milk, essentially, unless certain criteria are met where the milk is, where that plant withdraws their milk from the pool, Class 1 milk is mandatorily to be pooled, the revenue from all of that. And again, this is a mathematical calculation, which I'll explain to you how that goes in a second. And then plants can also agree to pool their Class 2, Class 3, and Class 4. Now, why is that, you'd say? Well, there was a time when there was such a milk market in this country that processors wanted to be a more attractive place to sell the milk. It wasn't a buyer's market, it was more of a seller's market, and processors needed to entice people to sell them their milk for some of these, let's say, lesser uses like butter or something. And so agreeing voluntarily as a processor to pool your class 2 revenue or your class 2 sales revenue, so to speak, would enable you to pay people more, essentially, in the end, for giving you milk or selling you milk that would be used for, let's say, powder or butter. And so that was needed by processors at one time in order to keep their milk supplies stable and flowing. So that's why Class 1 was always the mandatory order or the mandatory pooling, but the other classes came into play because processors wanted that, and that helped them, attract a milk supply. Now, things are different now. Things are obviously totally different. We have a buyer's market. There is more milk than we need, and we're constantly looking for new products and new ways to consume the milk that's being produced out there, whether it's exporting, whether it's Greek yogurt, which uses some exponential amount of milk per per volume of yogurt produced, things of that nature. Stuffed crust cheese, pizza for that matter, was invented by milk marketing minds in order to consume more cheese. You have also, you have this interesting historical dynamic as to what's going on. But the bottom line is, now, if this is how it worked and everybody just, okay, I deliver my milk and then you figure all this out on a monthly basis, how much of the entire monthly load this plant used for each class, and then the federal prices that were set for those classes, it all gets pooled and it's all distributed and everything's fine. Everybody who participated in the pool gets the same amount. It'd be great, but unfortunately it doesn't work that way because the money needs to start flowing immediately. You can't wait around, for the time necessary, or dairy producers can't wait around for the time necessary. So there's basically two parts to it. There is an initial advance price payment that is required by the marketing order. And then there is a second process that is a truing up process where then the final uniform price is determined. And sometimes it's lower than what the advance price was. And so, you would like it to always be higher, but it depends on what the utilization was. And I'll show you a graphic for that in a minute. Now, I know I'm probably losing a few people, but let's just hang in. I'm going to try to keep it simple from here. Now, this is a graphic. I'm just going to show you one thing here that kind of will hopefully make things easier to understand. I'm going to draw a line right down the middle here. See where it goes class 1, 2, 3, and 4 on the right-hand side. Everything to the left of that is the headache-producing internal calculations that go on in order to establish the class 1 price, the class 2 price, the class 3 price, and the class 4 price, which then, if they get pooled, or if that particular milk supply is not pooled, these prices apply as the minimum price. So in other words, if milk is not in the pool, then the people, and the contributors to that pool, and someone is not in the pool, in other words, their milk did not get pooled with the rest, then they're going to get just the basic minimum price for the class that was used. In any event, and there's a two-step process here, which is over here on the left. These are like the advance price. This is to indicate essentially some of the advance price announcements that are made, because there needs to be money distributed for purchasing milk. And then there's this second process that occurs after the month's books are closed, so to speak, and they determine what the total usage was within the entire milk marketing order, and then do the distributions from the pool. And it's sort of a theoretical pool because, it's all money that's being held by the processor, but USDA enforces the obligations to either pay more or, make an adjustment depending on the circumstances. And now I'm going to show you the next graphic. So everything to the left, by the way, again, these are complications in the system of setting these class prices, and that's where the real eyes glazing over occurs, and there's no way that anyone can understand the calculations that make up the class prices in a 1-hour webinar. So we're not going to deal with that. Here's a great graphic that USDA has put together, which explains this truing up process to arrive at a uniform price. Okay, there's two examples here. One coming from the bottom with a farmer B at the bottom selling milk to a cheese plant. Farmer A at the top is selling milk to a fluid milk bottling plant. Okay, so farmer A sells milk to a bottling plant, and that the processor buys it for $18 per hundredweight. That's 11.6 gallons, and that's the let's say that's the announced advance class 1 price. So all right, sorry. There we go. All right, so that's what happened, and let's say that when the final price is calculated, the final price ends up being $17 a hundredweight. A dollar goes into this pool to be redistributed. And then and you'll see how it gets redistributed in a second. Farmer B is selling to a cheese plant. So the advance price is 16. It turns out that for that month, the actual final price should have been 17. Then that extra dollar is going to go out of the pool, and it's going to go to the person that supplied their milk for cheese, because they were shorted $1 on what turned out to be the final price. So you see how these two farmers selling to two different plants within one milk marketing order geographic area, and one is essentially, they're both getting the same uniform price, but the advance price was in one case a little higher and in one case a little lower. Okay, this is a little diagram of the federal order pricing for July of 2023. And this is a little bit example of how the uniform price ultimately gets calculated. Here you have the results of the month of July 2023 within and this is Federal Order 1. Within Federal Order 1, there was this quantity, I guess it's 2 billion pounds of milk and some change. The usage within that big pot of milk that was utilized or in Federal Order 1 is set forth here in the percentage column. Sorry, I'm using the pointer on the wrong slide. So class 1 was 26% of that. Class 2 was 26. Class 3 was 30, and class 4 was 16% of that. Here were the the minimum advance prices for those various classes. And so we don't have the dollar figure here, but essentially you just apply those percentages to the dollar figure that is produced, and that is how you end up dividing up the revenue that is generated by this, by this weight of milk in Federal Order 1. And here's a little example of the ultimate in this particular location, Suffolk County, Massachusetts, and they do vary by, because there are different costs in different, locations. Ultimately, the uniform price for this particular location in Suffolk County, Massachusetts, in Federal Order 1 was $19.56. Okay. I will go forward and talk a little bit about. We'll skip over this for a second. We will talk. This is a nice little graphic that shows you for the year 2021 where Pennsylvania stands in the grand scheme of things. Pennsylvania has lost many places in the pecking order of production. Now, this is the total amount of milk in the federal order system, and Pennsylvania is right here as number 6 producer, pretty much tied with Michigan. We used to be 3, 4. We're getting jumped over by Texas in particular, and Michigan has really put on a full court press, and New York has really jumped up too. You looked at this 10 years before this, and Pennsylvania would have been number 3 after probably California and Wisconsin. New York has really advanced. Okay. This is also within Federal Order 1. It kind of shows you the ranking and the amount of milk being produced. Okay. Okay, now there is federal milk marketing order reform that's going on right now as we speak. And this is a whole bunch of slides that talk about that. And I'm going to go to one of them, which is right here. If we clicked on this Zoom link right now, we would be watching a federal milk marketing order reform hearing that is going on right now in order to reform the calculations due to a number of factors that have sort of coalesced to make the industry essentially clamor, let's just say, for reform of the pricing system. The basic pooling concepts all, remain agreeable to most industry players, but the calculations on a lot of these things, a lot of the components of the pricing system have produced results that no one is happy with. All right, let's go to the Pennsylvania portion just to talk about what Pennsylvania does. Okay, now, Pennsylvania has a thing called the Pennsylvania Milk Marketing Board, and it administers a unique Pennsylvania-only pricing system, which is done through what are called official general orders. The Milk Marketing Board is made up of 3 members who hold hearings and then issue orders. And now, what do they do? Well, they do a couple of things. One thing that the Pennsylvania Milk Marketing Board does that isn't really well recognized is that it's not even on this slide, is that you remember the map where we had portions of Pennsylvania that were not covered by a milk marketing order. One of the things that the federal milk marketing, that the Pennsylvania Milk Marketing Board does is make sure that those federal order prices also are made to apply in the entire state of Pennsylvania, so that there are, in fact, governmentally mandated minimums in all parts of Pennsylvania, not just where those orders are located. But I do think that most of the dairy plants are within wherever those orders exist anyway. Now, there are 3 portions to what the Pennsylvania Milk Marketing Board does. It sets a minimum producer price, which is one thing. Then it sets a wholesale minimum price, which is minimum prices for the milk being sold by dealers. And then it sets minimum retail prices. So if you've ever noticed in Pennsylvania, there's no such thing as a sale on milk. Because or at least they may cut a price, but they're not going to go below the government required minimum. So there's no sale at $1 for a gallon of milk like you might see in other states. And the point is that Pennsylvania has decided to adopt a system like this where these prices are regulated by the government in order to avoid the downward pressure from retailers on wholesalers, meaning processors, to cut their prices to the bone, so to speak, and the downward pressure from processors to dairy farmers to cut their prices to the bone. So all of this market generated pressure to the industry to essentially, potentially even sell at a loss. It's hard enough to make a buck on milk as it is, let alone having market pressures where retailers are telling you that, well, I'm just going to, go somewhere else and buy my milk or buy milk cheaper. You can't buy milk cheaper in Pennsylvania because the government sets the minimum wholesale price and the minimum retail price. Every time you go in a grocery store, you buy milk, you're paying at least the government established minimum retail price for milk. Now, interestingly enough, this has not necessarily made us stand out that much, a little bit, in relation to our neighbors in terms of the price of milk here. It's probably, if anything, it's actually had the surrounding states have brought their prices, up and have been consistently, because Pennsylvania isn't really creating any pressure on them. So in any event, now, buried in this price calculation of these minimums in Pennsylvania is a thing called the overorder premium. And the overorder premium is another version of the concept of taking the increased revenue that can be obtained for selling fluid milk and trying to essentially give it back to dairy farmers by essentially, there is a overorder premium that says if your milk is produced and processed in Pennsylvania and then sold retail in Pennsylvania, and you can trace that volume all the way through, then you're going to get paid a little bit more for 100 weight of milk. And right now, the overorder premium is $1.32. It's $1 overorder premium plus 32 cents for a fuel adjuster for the increases in diesel fuel prices, because producers have to pay for the transportation of their milk to the factory or to the processor. By the way, Audrey, before I keep going, are there any questions in the Q&A?
Actually, we do have one, and if you've got a minute, I'm going to go ahead and ask it because I think it's a really good one. John Agner asked, since these orders have to go through the hearing process, are they basically regulations under the Federal Administrative Procedures Act, and then does the APA, the Federal Administrative Procedures Act, govern these regulations and the processes?
Correct, and then there are absolutely correct, and then but it's instead of being a reg, it's subject to the Administrative Procedures Act, administrative proceeding rules. In other words, it's not a reg, but it's a order produced as a result of an administrative proceeding that is governed by the Administrative Procedures Act. So that's sort of like the other side to a regulation. It's an order from the agency developed after a process that is similarly regulated. So good question.
Yeah,
okay.
Very good question. We got about 3 minutes, so.
All right. Okay, so there has been a lot of controversy over the overorder premium, and what's been happening is that two things occur. When you say that that every single time you buy a gallon of milk in the state of Pennsylvania, you're paying a state government mandated minimum price that essentially, is guaranteed revenue to the retailer for every gallon. They know exactly what they're going to get. So what's to say, why don't they just go to, Delaware, Maryland, West Virginia, wherever, and buy their milk dirt cheap, where there is not a mandatory minimum wholesale price, and then bring that milk into Pennsylvania and sell it at this higher minimum retail price in Pennsylvania. And that is exactly possible, and it does go on. So that produces a bit of dissatisfaction with the Pennsylvania system, because people who are not actually answerable to Pennsylvania producers for this overorder premium are getting the benefit of these minimum prices. And that's the same with the processor level, because someone who operates a processing plant would say, well, why don't I just get all my milk over across the line in New York, bring it into Pennsylvania, process it here, and when I sell it here, I got a guaranteed government minimum wholesale price that the people in New York don't have, and so I'm making out. And that actually can go on too. And there's many other permutations of that, where milk ends up, or those who sell milk at wholesale or retail get the benefit of our minimum pricing system, but don't pay any dairy producer for that benefit. The whole pricing system is based upon an assumption that every gallon of milk in Pennsylvania was produced by a Pennsylvania producer and was sold at wholesale in Pennsylvania. And that just is so far from the truth now, with the advent of, the ability to move milk around, refrigeration trucks, the whole modernization of interstate commerce to the point where it is today, that the essential foundation of this over premium is a bit faulty. And so at this point, the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture, there are legislators, there are many, many dairy industry stakeholders, primarily from the producer standpoint, all of whom have essentially taken a position one way or another that the overorder premium as administered by Pennsylvania's Milk Marketing Board at this point in time is no longer of help and is in fact potentially too fraught with problems that it may even be hurting. And one of the other things is that there is, Pennsylvania is a milk excess state, so we produce way more milk than we drink. Only about 15 to 20% of the milk that is produced in Pennsylvania ever gets this overorder premium. The other, 85 to 80 to 85%. Somebody's getting a benefit of this minimum pricing down the line when they're not paying it at the farm gate, so to speak, to a producer. So there's a lot of dissatisfaction. There are bills in the legislature now to loosen that up and to change that entire thing. So if you hear the whole issue about the overorder premium being discussed, just know that it is a Pennsylvania only benefit that is a bit antiquated in its calculation and its administration, and there is a large movement afoot in state government to do away with it and retool the concept of, when you buy a gallon of milk, maybe dairy farmers should get some direct benefit that is tracked by the government. Now, the third real word is milk tax, and no one wants to say that. But the bottom line is that's what's afoot right now, is a retooling of a Pennsylvania program to benefit our producers specifically. All right, so with that in mind, I will stop.
All right. Well, great. Thank you so much, Brooke. That was wonderful. Thank you to everyone who attended. We encourage you to go ahead and register now for our upcoming programming. Pesticides, again, that recertification credit is available. Seed laws, Fair Labor Standards Act, and PACA coming up. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me personally, aet17@psu.edu. My email is also on our website, aglaw.psu.edu. And we hope to see you or hear from you in our future programming. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.